Okay. Hey, everybody. This is Jeff Martin with Magic City Books and the Tulsa Literary Coalition. We're so thrilled to have you back here for our weekly virtual author series. We've been doing a lot of these events over the past few months. I think we're getting close to maybe 40 or so of these events that we've done in this quarantine, lockdown, COVID-19 era. And we've had such a great variety of authors, and it's been so cool to stay connected with you, our audience, through these events. One of the things I was really nervous about at the beginning was kind of losing connection to you, our community of readers and customers. And so it's been a real fun thing to really, keep tethered to you in some way or another. Tonight is a really special evening because we're partnering with our friends at PEN America. Tulsa is home to one of 6 PEN America chapters around the country. And each one is led by someone local like me. I lead the Tulsa chapter. If you don't know the work of PEN America, we work to support literary and local news advocacy around the country. And one of the special things about that you guys can help with is PEN is a membership organization and always needs your support to keep doing the vital work that we do through PEN. And tonight we're doing a special offer. So if you want to become a PEN member, your first year, there's going to be a discount. You can go to pen.org and sign up, and there's a special code we'll post in the chat here. It's PENFRIEND, all caps, PENFRIEND, PENFRIEND, and you can become a PEN member and save a little bit on your first year. Support PEN. They do great work. We do great work. We're excited to do more as we grow the local presence here with PEN, and really excited to be part of that organization. So we'll post that in the chat here. We have a lot of great events coming up. I don't want to go through the full list, but I will encourage you to go to magiccitybooks.com and see our full lineup. We have things booked all the way through September at this point. That's everything from, John Waters and Mike Birbiglia this Saturday, and, just all kinds of stuff, very serious topics to kind of more fun, frivolous things. Something for everybody, mystery, food-related events, a lot of different things. So check the website out. Tonight, we are so thrilled and honored to be talking to Jennifer Finney Boylan, who is also on the board of trustees for PEN America, I should say. If you don't know Jennifer's work, she has done so many different things. She writes a op-ed column for the New York Times, has done consulting on Transparent, the Caitlyn Jenner program, I Am Cait, and teaches at Columbia as well. And I'm forgetting a million other things. But tonight we're going to be talking about Good Boy, which is probably why you're seeing a special visitor right now here and amongst us. Who I think we have maybe a third party here. Who is this I'm talking to here?
I don't know what you're talking about, Jeff.
Oh, okay. Hello.
It's Jenny Boylan, your special guest.
Okay. I'm sorry.
All right, just kidding.
Oh, hey, there we go.
All right.
I was really hoping we could kind of do this. This would be a wild thing to do.
We can try that. You want to go? We can.
It'd be like Edgar Bergen or something.
I met Candace Bergen one time at a ventriloquist convention that I was doing a story on, and she was a reporter for 60 Minutes. She was doing a piece on ventriloquists. Yeah, this is the kind of thing that happens if you're a well-known literary advocate of freedom of expression. You ventriloquist conventions.
I love the idea of a ventriloquist convention. That seems like...
Well, can I tell you, the highlight of it was the bar scene late at night with all of those ventriloquists and their dummies and their puppets lining the bar. Oh my God. I didn't want to...
like the old trick where they drink a beer while they talk kind of thing. I feel like that must be going nonstop.
Yeah, it was pretty sketchy, I have to say. And I remember asking Candace Bergen, so what was it like being the daughter of Edgar Bergen? And she just kind of looked at me like, it wasn't fun.
The thing that always, not to get off on a tangent here, but the thing that always I thought was the strangest about Charlie McCarthy, who was his famous dummy, was that Charlie McCarthy had one of the most popular radio programs of all time.
That's right. Yeah, it was ventriloquism on the radio. Candace Bergen did tell me that her the dummy had his own room in the house, and that it was actually a nicer room than hers. So I can see how you get a little.
Yeah. Well, pardon the digression.
Where were we?
Pardon the digression, everybody, but we're thrilled to have Jenny Boylan with us. Thank you for joining us. I'm so excited to talk about the new book. I will say this. I've never in my whole life had a dog until recently. I got a dog
Right.
first time in my life. I turned 40 a few days ago, so it's been a while. And right after the closures began and the pandemic started, we got a dog. And to be honest with you, I can't imagine going through these past few months without having our dog. It's been a pretty amazing thing to have from the point of just sheer companionship. So it's been a pretty special moment to me. And so reading the book.
Sure. I mean, I think people feel, we all feel on edge. We all feel lonely. We all feel kind of despair at the world that we've lost. And, you know, even quite frankly, even if there wasn't COVID right now, I think people could quite well feel a lot of despair about the state of the country and the state of the world. Mm-hmm. So a dog, you know, sometimes what you need is a dog.
Yeah, for sure.
To raise your spirits and to remind you that you are, that you're loved and that you're worth loving.
Yeah. One of my favorite, the title of the book, Good Boy, of course, is kind of a double meaning there.
You think?
Yeah. And, I'm interested in the way you kind of refer to your life as a child, and you refer to it as a boyhood, and you refer to it in a way that I think some people may take issue with in the trans community, but you're very kind of upfront about looking at your life and kind of this, and it almost seems like this boyhood that you had and you speak of was kind of something you look back fondly on in certain ways. So I'm curious to kind of know why you chose this device. You've written memoirs before, so obviously you chose to kind of build this book around the dogs that you've had in your life. But talk about kind of the process that led to making the decision to use that framework.
Well, I mean, it really began with a column that I wrote for the New York Times. Some of you probably know I write I have an op-ed column that appears every other Wednesday, and we had just lost our dog Indigo, who was just a great spirit, a great character, and so I wrote the column that you're really not supposed to write, which is the dead dog column, which I think among columnists, it's kind of like everyone knows it's a cheap shot. You can get a lot of readers and you can make a lot of people cry by talking about your dog. And yet there was no way I was going to write about anything else that week because it's all I cared about. So, maybe it's predictable that column did really, really, really well. It was the #1 column on the Times for a couple days running. And what I think made the bells ring for me was that in some ways the column wasn't so much about the dog as it was about who I'd been during the decade or more that we'd had the dog, and how the dog kind of was a constant, and it was kind of the MacGuffin that enabled me to talk about what it was like to go through transition and to have kids and to survive into this world as a family. So I guess that's what kind of got me thinking about it. And what I started thinking about is the way dogs teach us about love. And that's true even when the dogs you've had, like my dogs, have been not necessarily good boys or good girls. I mean, some of the dogs that I've had are really kind of terrible. I mean, I didn't think of them as terrible, but, we had a dog that chased people, on motorcycles. We had a dog that would knock you over as you came through the door. I mean, we had a lot of really problematic dogs. And yet, each of them taught me something about love. And in looking back on all that, I guess what I realized is that most of the dogs that I had are dogs that I had pre-transition. For those of you who are coming in late, I'm a transgender woman. I'm 60 years old, over 60 years old now, and came out around when I was 40. So I've spent like a third of my life I spent as a boy and a young man, a third as a young man in the world, and a third I've spent as a woman. So it's a lot of my life now. And if you're a transgender person, it's easy to think of your life, if you go through transition, that is, it's easy to think of your life in terms of before and after, to have this kind of dividing line, and to think that it's the after that counts. It's the after when you really began to live your truth, and when you began to, you know, exist in the world without secrets. And that's true. I mean, and I'm really proud and happy and lucky that I was able to somehow come out and be able to be myself at a time when I thought that the odds were long that I'd ever be able to do that. But when I think about those before years, it makes me feel a little strange to think, you know, what do I make of the fact that I'm a middle-aged woman who had a boyhood? What happened to all those years? Who was that kid? Who was that boy? And I kind of hate to just draw a line and say that those years didn't matter, because in fact, that person informs who I am now. The fact that I had a boyhood doesn't make me any less female. It doesn't make me any less of a woman. I mean, if I'd come out when I was, you know, 5 or 6, if I'd been like Jazz Jennings, say, or some of these other young people who were able to live their truth from a very early age, I probably wouldn't think of it that way. But, you know, I lived for the year as a boy, or a young man even, for 40 years. And there's some really important and very good things that happened during those years. You know, it wasn't all tears and sobbing and feeling like I was going to die. Sometimes, but there was also being in love and having friends and climbing mountains and being in bands. And so writing about dogs enabled me to kind of have a conversation with that younger self. So this book, Good Boy, A Life in 7 Dogs, is about the 7 dogs that I had pre-transition. It's about the dogs that I had and the boy that I was. So there's a dog that I had when I was a boy. There's a dog that I had when I was, you know, a surly teenager. There's a dog that I had when I was being really cool, you know, in college. There's a dog for when I was a hipster in New York, and a dog for when I was a boyfriend and a husband and a father. And in gathering together all the stories around the dogs, you know, actually, it's not really a book about dogs at all. Right. It's a book about love, and it's a book, in some ways, it's a book about men, because I think men, we all know that the most important thing that we're here for is to love each other. And yet talking about love and showing the love that we have is a thing that we're not all that good at, or it makes people roll their eyes. It's awkward. It's, you know, it's clumsy, or it can be. And I think it's especially true of some men. My father was someone who had a very hard time talking about his emotions, but he could get down on the floor and wrestle with that dog and tell the dog how much he loved the dog. So all of those are about why I chose to write about dogs. When you talk about dogs, you're talking about love. When you're talking about love, you're talking about men and women. Men, women, love, dogs. Aren't those the 4 most important things to write about? Food. I guess food is in there, but maybe that's the next book.
You know, I'm glad you said that, because, you know, one of the things that I loved about this book was, you know, I'm not gay. I'm certainly not transitioned, but the commonality of your experience as a young person, and mine even as just a sensitive, bookish kid who was not macho in any way, you know, but just kind of a very kind of interior life, and kind of really kind of lived inside my own head. The commonality of that, and kind of having to deal with this outside world that's kind of pushing against that, I felt a lot of common ground with the life that you describe as a younger person, you know, and we were all dealing with different things. You know,
a person in a room with a dog is not a person who is alone. Yeah. And you know, does your dog really need to understand everything that's in your heart in order for that dog to love you? No. Your dog's love for you is, well, I mean, I guess people say dogs' love is unconditional. I mean, they're good at it. They're constant at it. But sometimes what I think what's really unconditional is the love that we have for them. That we are sometimes able to express love for dogs or feel a sense of belonging, connection. You know, when we can't express that with the other people in our lives. I mean, I remember if you're lucky, you have a dog who's been around you when you've been through something really sad. And when my father died, our family had a chocolate lab named Brown, with a brilliant, imaginative name, Brown. And I just remember, you know, in his final days, just sitting by myself, just kind of weeping and being inarticulate and not knowing what to say. But the dog would come over and put her head in my lap. And I described the scene in the book that she came over to me like a dyslexic Presbyterian and said, I am thy dog. He who believes in dog is not alone. For he who knows dog knows love.
Yeah. Dog is my co-pilot.
Dog is my co-pilot.
Yeah.
Indeed. Indeed.
I'm curious to know, just to step back a bit, you know, you've written a lot of fiction, of course, but you've written a lot of nonfiction in the time since you came out and since you transitioned, including previous memoirs. You know, She's Not There was a really powerful book as well, that even, you know, dived into this at a time when it doesn't seem like many people were really even talking about this as much. My question is, did you feel compelled to start writing and advocating and kind of being in front of this issue? Or did you, you know, want to kind of live inside yourself more and kind of figure things out? Because it seems like you were doing a lot of these things at the same time, kind of being a public face of this movement and also trying to figure out how to do your own life. You know?
That's a really good question. I mean, and I can tell you, so I was trained as a novelist and a short story writer. And when I wrote the memoir, She's Not There, which is a story of transition, I kind of figured I'd write the one book about being trans and then that would be it. And then I'd go back to writing fiction. But I found something in writing nonfiction that I was not able to find, and memoir in particular, which I was not able to find in the fiction. You know, my fiction was always very kind of goofy. It was funny. It had a serious heart, but there were, you know, the stories that I wrote were really, really kind of out there. And I mean, I'm very proud of it. I loved all that inventive, wild stuff. My teacher was John Barth. And I still am a great fan of, you know, what we used to call metafiction and maximalism. But there was something about that work that felt, it was, I don't want to say it wasn't true, but there was something, it was too kind of obsessed with itself. And ironically, in writing memoir, where, you know, you're writing about yourself, I was able to get to something that felt truer and more important. I have published fiction since transition. I had a novel that came out 4 years ago called Long Black Veil. And I have a young adult series called Falcon Quinn. But in some ways, I feel like, I mean, I felt a little bit like, you know, before I came out, I was writing fiction because there were certain things in my life that weren't true. And post-transition, I've written nonfiction because I wanted to embrace the truth of my life. And it's not to say that fiction is always false and memoir is always true, because as we all know, there's a lot of shit that people make up in memoir, not me, of course. And there's a lot of fundamental human truth in fiction. So it doesn't really break down exactly that neatly. But I know that I found something in writing memoir, which, I mean, I don't really like the word memoir because it seems, memoir sounds kind of like your Charlton Heston describing what it was like to make Ben-Hur or something.
Right.
But writing true stories that are first person, I don't know, I felt like I found something, and a lot of these stories had not been told before. The stories of transgender people, you know, raising a family and having a life. A lot of the stories hadn't been told before, and I thought that it was important to tell those stories. I mean, as it turned out, you know, I thought I'd write this one book and I'd be done. I didn't want to be a so-called activist because I thought, I mean, to me, an activist was somebody who chained themselves to the fence and went on a hunger strike. And I just, you know, I'm not any good at that stuff. I'm too selfish. And so I figured, well, what can I do? I can write. But as it turns out, writing is a great form of activism. And if there's anybody who's listening to this, who's wondering, what can I do to change the world? You know, it doesn't have to be. I mean, believe me, I believe in public protest. I believe in dissent. I believe in all the work that's being done in this country right now by everyone who's getting out to protest racism and violence and all the other plagues in this country. But it also can change the world if you tell your story, especially if your story is not one that people know, especially if people think things about people like you that are not true. So that's what I stayed with, is telling stories. And I mean, I can't say it's changed the world, but it seems like the thing I can do, and it's the thing I'm going to keep doing because I keep hoping that it'll make things better.
Yeah. You know, the process of transitioning, of course, is not a overnight process. It's not as if you're going in to get a nose job and then the next day everything's different. But I wonder, you know, if it feels like, you know, your whole life you kind of had been wearing the shoes that don't fit, and then one day you finally get a pair that fit. You do feel some moment of, when was the moment when it felt like I'm finally feeling the way that I've always wanted to feel? You know, was there?
This is the nerdiest answer I can give you, but the day that I remember that was when I first typed out my name, Jenny Boylan. When I typed my name as my byline on something I'd written.
Yeah.
Forgot what I'd written, but I wrote, you know, something, and then I wrote by Jennifer Finney Boylan, and I sat back and I looked at the computer screen and I thought, the hell yeah. That's probably what meant more to me than anything else. And I know that just means that I'm a writer and live in a possibly bookish life. But, you know, I mean, you know, I didn't.
But it speaks to the mental component as opposed to the solely physical. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. It's not just about the physical side, right?
I mean, by the time I actually had surgery, it was kind of an afterthought. And, you know, nobody really knew, except for my family, nobody really knew when I'd had it or when I hadn't had it. And if I'd never had it, who would know now anyway? Right. I think the big deal was not going from male to female. The big deal was going from someone who had a secret to somebody who didn't have a secret, or who didn't have that secret. I felt like a person who could be known in the world, and that, you know, if you have a secret, it's kind of like having a dog. It's kind of like having a giant Saint Bernard that is invisible or something. It's like something that has to go with you everywhere, and it's slobbering and it's on a leash, and you constantly have to tend it.
Yeah. So like a shadow of some kind, you know?
Yeah. So in a way, the big thing for me was, I mean, I would still be me if I had, you know, short hair. I would still be me if I wasn't shaped like this. But being unburdened of secrets is incredibly powerful. And if you're a transgender person who's in the closet and you're listening to this, can I just say, unburdening yourself doesn't mean you have to tell your mother, your father, your wife, your husband, your children. It can help if you tell just one person, and it doesn't even have to be someone that close to you. Because it's the closer someone is to you and the more gender matters in the relationship, the harder it is to share what you've had in your heart. There are support groups all over this country. There are support groups in Tulsa. There are support groups in Oklahoma City. So if what you need, if you're dealing with any of these issues, you know, find somebody to talk to. Find a therapist, preferably one who's trained in gender issues. You know, I would call myself a Christian, but if you go to therapy for transgender stuff and the first word out of your therapist's mouth is Jesus, you might want to see whether that's the therapist you need to be going to. Although, again, I don't want to be snarky about that, because, as I said, my own faith is something that's very powerful for me and has been a great support. Anyway, I'm not generally in the advice business, but I always remember the anagram TRUE, T-R-U-E. If you're struggling with these issues, T stands for talk, or therapy if you want. Find someone to talk to. R stands for read, and it doesn't have to be my books, although they are wonderful. There are a lot of good books by trans people. A book I love to promote is called Trans Bodies, Trans Selves, which is published by Oxford University Press. It's like 600, 700 pages long, and it's just a compendium of everything you'd ever want to know. It's about transitioning, it's about different ways of being trans, it's about families and marriages and children and hormones and everything else. It's a great resource, Trans Bodies, Trans Selves. So that's read, T-R. U stands for you. You be you, whatever that means. Whenever you can be you, according to your definition and in your own time. And then E stands for euphoria, or ecstasy. Find your bliss, as Joseph Campbell used to say. And, you know, we're not here on this earth to be miserable. So find your joy as best you can.
That's great. I want to take a moment. For those of you who are just joining us, we're talking to Jennifer Finney Boylan. We're so excited to have her here. If you don't have a copy of Good Boy, we encourage you to do so. We have links here in our chat. Their special guest is back. You can get a copy through the chat and become a member of PEN America as well. We're going to post links for that. So I'd like to talk about passing for a second.
Oh, that's a great question.
You've talked about this, and it's a complicated issue. For those who may not know even what I'm talking about, can you kind of describe what passing is?
Yeah, sure. So passing, and it's not just the thing that's related to transgender people. It's kind of about the degree to which your life is either easier or harder based on the degree to which you resemble or don't resemble everybody else. So if you're a Black person in a very white area, that you can find yourself in, you know, on the receiving end of bigotry, obviously. Historically, we've seen that African Americans with darker skin can be on the receiving end of more bigotry than African Americans with lighter skin. So, you know, passing also has to do with kind of the spectrum of the ways in which people can resemble normative culture, which usually is straight, white, you know, Christian culture. You know, but it's also a thing Jewish people talk about, people who can pass as goyim, people. What does it mean to look Jewish? And people who look Jewish are treated one way, and people who don't look Jewish, whatever that means, are treated another way, even though they may believe the same thing. Or someone who comes from a Jewish family who looks Jewish, who may be an atheist, or have converted to Buddhism or something, but they can still be on the receiving end of anti-Semitism because of the way they look, right? So I'm sorry if I'm doing a kind of an inarticulate crash course in what this means, but I think people know that sometimes you can escape from some of the cruelty and bigotry of the world if people don't know that you're not like them. which is to say, in the transgender world in particular, among transgender women, if someone can look at you and know that you're trans, that's one kind of experience in the world. If people look at you and have no idea, that can be another experience. I mean, it shouldn't be, obviously. But in the transgender community, particularly in, I think, you know, in popular culture in Hollywood, there's a real emphasis on being beautiful. Our community is sometimes dominated. There's a kind of tyranny of the pretty. And that's, of course, that holds true for women who aren't trans as well, I guess. Anyway, when I first came out, it was really important for me that nobody know that I was trans. So, you know, I did a lot of things to kind of fit in with other women, or whatever. And yet that's kind of the $1 million question, isn't it? What does it mean to fit in? And what are you losing in yourself? What are you compromising or giving up if you're trying to live up to somebody else's standard, if you're trying to be like other people? I mean, you know, you go through this whole transition in order to become yourself, right? And then you start acting in a different way, just so that you won't be on the receiving end of trouble. Yeah. I don't know. It's a complicated business, and I'm not sure that I'm describing it very well at all. I know that my voice was more kind of stereotypically feminine when I first came through transition. It was a little bit higher. It was a little more, it would go up and down like this. It would be much more, you know, lyrical. It would go up and, you know, kind of do stuff.
And that was an affectation you were working on at the time?
I don't know if I want to call it an affectation, but it was something I was trying to mirror the sound of the women around me. And the voice that I'm speaking in now is probably not the same voice that I spoke in pre-transition. But what I found was that using that more, I don't know, that other voice made it hard for me to reach the back row when I was giving a lecture to my students. And it just, there's a way in which it just didn't quite feel real. I'll tell you a big thing that happened to me was singing, actually, because I play piano and I like to sing. But you know, when I throw back my head to sing, if people don't know that I'm trans and they hear me talk, they really do know it when they hear me singing. And it can be really quite exciting if I'm in some, you know, trashy bar in the back country here in Maine and playing with the band, and suddenly I go up to the mic and I, you know, get everyone's attention. So the question is, do I want people to know that I'm trans?
Right.
Because I don't really want to hide it, because it's not something that it's something that I'm proud of. On the other hand, it's at the same time also nobody's business. So I don't know.
I guess my question is, how long does it take to stop worrying about other people looking at you, even if they're not? You're thinking that they might be. I mean, what kind of...
For a transgender person or for anybody? I mean, I'm 62 and I still worry.
I'm saying just for you personally, if that's been something that's...
I guess I still worry sometimes about what people think about me. I shouldn't. It's a adolescent thing to worry about, but I do think about it. I think there's a thing, you know, there's just not that many transgender authors in the public eye, and I kind of I don't want to let down the side, you know. I want people to hear me and think, well, Jenny was articulate. She found the right words. She spoke the words that needed to be said. And it is the question, you know, do we ever let go of that? Do we care? I mean, you know, I know a lot of people who say, oh, I don't care what other people think. You know, I can't be spending my, well, good for you, man. Yeah. I wish I had what you have. I just have a very thin skin. I think I'm very vulnerable in the world. And it plays hell with my emotions, but I think it's also good to have thin skin. It means that the world's getting through to you. It means that you're that you're alive and that you're not just some, you know, you're not Iron Man, you know? Who wants to be Iron Man?
Well, you know, you mentioned, you know, that you have
the flying. Okay, the flying would be great. You know?
flying would be cool, and his, you know, it's pretty rich too. That would be nice too, right?
Oh yeah. Okay. All right.
But you know, you
I'll
mentioned
take it back. Iron Man would be okay for a little bit, anyway.
you mentioned coming to Oklahoma a lot because you have a lot of family ties here. I wonder what the response is, and you travel, obviously pre-COVID, travel around and give talks and do all kinds of different things. What the response is like geographically around the country when you go places. If living in New York City, obviously is different than maybe if you're, you know, giving a talk in rural Alabama. I just wonder if you feel the gaze more frequently when you're in different parts of the country based on kind of the demographics.
Well, of course I've been doing, and of course I live in Maine, in rural Maine for about 8 months of the year. And it's different here than in New York. But it's also changed over time. Like, you know, when I first came out and I was on the Oprah show and I was, you know, it was a whole big thing. I traveled around the country a lot, and it was kind of like I was the first transgender person anybody had seen. I mean, in 2002 or 3, there'd been, I don't know, Renee Richards, the tennis player, or Christine Jorgensen. I mean, speaking of authors now, right? Not activists like Sylvia Rivera or,
right.
I mean, there'd been Cait Bornstein, God bless her. But I still felt, I mean, I remember I did an event, where was it? I think it was Texas. And a woman had driven like 200 miles to come see me because she had a transgender child and she'd never laid eyes on another transgender person in the flesh. So that was what things were like almost 20 years ago. Things aren't like that now anymore. And there are more different kinds of transgender people in the public eye. There are more, there are people who are a lot more famous than I am. You know, other people making movies and films and TV shows, and you know, meanwhile I've kind of gone back to my desk and I'm back to, you know, writing stories and columns. So it's changed also as the culture has gotten a little bit wiser. But yeah, I would still say it does. I mean, it does change where I'm at. I mean. And I mean, I don't want to, it's not quite as easy to say it's about geography or urban versus rural. I will say that there are some places that I go to where there are a lot of, you know, queer activists in the front row who are kind of, you know, rolling their eyes and sighing because I seem to, you know, conservative or moderate or old-fashioned to them, which I'm not really, I can tell you. But you know, I tend to talk a lot about stuff like the power of love and the power of story and the power of family and the power of dogs. And you know, that's not necessarily what a lot of people who are, you know, 20 years old and genderqueer, you know, non-binary, that's not exactly what people want to hear about. People want to know about how can we remake the world. The only thing I can do in those situations is get out of the way and let people tell their own stories and try to empower other people.
You know, that actually brings up a good point because, you know, the LGBTQ movement is a big tent, but it's not, you know, there's a lot of different ways of thinking within that. And so I wonder what kind of pressure you feel or have felt to kind of speak for, even if it's not the case, you know, being kind of speaking for the trans movement generally, and if that's been difficult.
I've tried to make it clear in my writing that I'm really only speaking for myself, and that, you know, the experience of a middle-aged white lady of privilege is really, really different from that of a young trans woman of color, maybe someone doing sex work, maybe someone who's non-binary. You know, there's just so many different ways of being trans in the world. And I think the voice of, for a long time, it was the voice of older white ladies like me that really dominated the movement. And it's not right. So that's another compelling reason to kind of get out of the way. You know, I was the chairman of the co-chair of the board of GLAAD, GLAAD, for many years over the last decade. And, you know, when I joined that organization, there was very few transgender people kind of connected with it. It was really an organization that was mostly concerned with the lives of gay men. Now, you know, I'd say more than half the work is around trans stuff, because those are the people who are most in danger right now. And so, you know, it is kind of a quandary that I find myself in sometimes, because I know that there are more stories to be told. And yet the only stories that I can tell are the ones that I know. So I am proud of the work that I do. I love being a storyteller. But I also, as best I can, try to promote the work of other writers, other trans writers, other trans people, so that people know that, you know, I'm just one person and there's a lot of stories to tell and there's a lot of work to do.
You know, before I want to touch on a few things related to kind of how the trans movement is being impacted by the current administration, but I'd like to talk for a second about, you mentioned the concept of privilege. And I'm curious, because you mentioned the fact that you see your life in kind of these thirds, right? The boyhood, the young man, and then this third period in your life. I wonder if you're able to look and see with that distance now, what it was like to have white male privilege, and how that's any different than even the life you live now. And if you can see any kind of critical view on how you benefited.
Yeah, well, I think whiteness trumps everything. And I think we have to look real hard at that. I certainly had male privilege, even though I wasn't particularly good at it, even though it wasn't something I wanted. But I was, you know, at the same time, striving, secretly yearning for something that seemed impossible. And whatever came to me by way of white male privilege felt like cheating. It felt like something that wasn't mine and didn't belong to me. And was not going to be of that much help to me in terms of trying to become the person I needed to be. I grew up in a very middle class and at times working class family. You know, I would certainly never have called my family a family of privilege, except on the other hand, though, it was a white family in the Philadelphia suburbs. So, you know, how much, maybe that speaks for itself, right? But, you know, when I got out of college, I was essentially, you know, cut off from my family. I mean, not cut off cold, but I would kind of, you know, told my parents, I'm going to go be a writer. And they said, well, good luck with that. And, you know, spent the next, you know, decade or so trying to make my way and living a pretty scary, impoverished life. I finally got myself to a writing school. I got a job teaching, and I've continued to work as a teacher. I've been grading papers for the last 35 years. So when I think privilege is it's really complicated, because there have been times when I've really had nothing, and there are times when well, there have been times when I had nothing. Although right now I'm very lucky. Now I teach an Ivy League college, and I get to write books, and I have the power that comes with a column in the New York Times. So, you know, but I never felt like I won the lottery. I always felt like I was hanging on for dear life and striving and working. I've always worked, kind of constantly working all the time. I didn't even like to go on vacations, because it meant, you know, I wouldn't have all my stuff. I wouldn't have my typewriter. So I say all that, and yet the same time, a white person whose parents were married, parents stayed married. I went to college. I never had to do sex work. Transition was not paid for by insurance the way it is for a lot of people now, but it was something that when I finally got around to, I'd finally saved enough money. So it's a complicated thing, but in the end, I keep coming back to that thing about whiteness that, I think whenever you hear people say, I worked for everything I have, I didn't take anything from anybody. And Caitlyn Jenner used to say that to me when we were doing the show together. I would say, dude, dude, yeah, you live on a mansion on top of a mountain in Malibu. And she would say, yeah, well, I started out poor and I worked for everything I had, and that's true. She did. And she did. But it's also, privilege is the kind of thing that if you have it, it's impossible to see that it came to you as a result of things that you didn't earn. You can be, privilege means that you're blind to the privileges that you have, and particularly the privilege of race.
Yeah. I'd like to end with a few minutes talking about some of the threats that you see to the trans community, how life may have changed or be in danger of changing. I think we don't read about much of this in the mainstream news, and I think a lot of us may not see how policies are being changed or certain things are happening. Can you kind of give me a broad assessment of what's happening last few years?
Well, trans people are under threat in all kinds of ways. First of all, transgender women of color continue to be murdered in this country at a rate that far outpaces almost any other group. It's a national shame, and it has to stop. We've also been under attack by this particular administration that has somehow figured out, I guess, that people are kind of tired of hating on the gays. So because transgender people, it's because the issues are a little harder to get your mind around, and our numbers are smaller. It seems like we've been fair ground for this administration, and they've just done everything they can to make our lives as difficult as possible. Everything short of erasing us, legally. It's the Supreme Court decision of last month was a shock, and it was wonderful that it was good news, and it was like the first good news that had come along for a while. Finally, there's the threat of there's a lot of attention is now being paid to a number of people, so-called feminists, who don't believe that transgender people exist, and some of the people in that camp are very well known and very powerful, and center a lot of their activism around worrying about stuff that either is completely untrue or stuff that's just really unlikely, like the idea of the man in the ladies' room coming for you. No one can stop a man in the ladies' room. Yeah, well, do you really think someone's going to go through transition just so they can creep up on you while you're taking a dump? I mean,
it goes back to like the North Carolina bathroom bill of what, 3-4 years? I don't even remember how many years ago.
Yeah.
To be a moment where this conversation really took a big turn there. Yeah.
Well, and there was pushback because I think, and eventually they had to repeal that. I'm happy to say, question: who has been arrested more frequently for altercations and solicitation in bathrooms, in public bathrooms? Transgender women or Republican congressmen? I'll give you a chance to think.
I'm going to go with option B.
Yeah, in fact, it's so. But no one's arguing that we shouldn't allow Republican congressmen in the bathroom. So people are worried about something that really, it's not really a thing, but because they can scare people with it, people are all up in arms about it. But what you never hear in these conversations is, what should we do about the fact that transgender men and women exist? I mean, maybe you'd like to live in a world where we didn't exist, but this is not that world. There are millions of trans people around the world. We've been here for hundreds and hundreds of years. We've been here for thousands of years. We're part of human nature. It's just a thing that nature does. And, you know, transgender people are who they are in part as a result of biology, as a result of neurology, of the way that we are made and the things that we've been given, the things that is in our brains and in our hearts. So we're here.
Yeah.
So if we're here, what shall we do? Shall we make transgender people's lives as miserable as possible because other people don't understand them? Or should we try, here's an idea, try to open our hearts a little bit, try to learn a little bit more about people whose experience of life is different from our own. I often, this is maybe a good place to end. You may know that I'm severely hard of hearing. I don't know much ASL, but the thing I love about American Sign Language is how lyrical it is, and how it also changes and adapts over time. So it used to be that the word for transgender is this. So that's the letter X. Sex is the letter X drawn down across your face, and transgender was sex backwards. It was a very kind of this way, that way of thinking about our experiences. The new way of signing transgender is this. So it's like a flower over your heart. It comes out, it faces the sky, it opens up, and it goes back into your heart facing the right direction. And I like to show that to people because, in fact, it's not just the thing that transgender people go through. That's the thing that all humans go through. There's no one watching this show, what is this? Our video.
Show. We had a puppet, so.
That who don't know what it's like to have something in your heart, some flower that cannot bloom because you have to keep it in the dark. But if you let it out, it comes out, it faces the sky, and it can go and live inside you in the right way. So that's the thing that we all do in life. It used to be that, and now it's this. And, you know, that's what's changed for me. When I first came out, when I wrote She's Not There, we were living in a world where it was like that. Now, with any luck, I hope that there's more room, not just for transgender people, but for everybody who has something in their heart to let it out, share it, and live their truth.
Well, I think that's a wonderful place to end on. There's a million more questions I'd love to ask you, but we don't want to keep people here forever. So thank you for that. That's a beautiful sentiment to end on. Thank you for your work that you've done, and thank you for your writing. If you guys haven't had a chance yet to get a copy of Good Boy, I'd encourage you to do so. Our special guest is about to make another appearance here. And we do have some links here in our chat to do that. Get a copy, join PEN America, support the work that we do through PEN. Jenny and I would thank you for doing that, for supporting PEN and the work we do. And we can't wait to speak with you again sometime, Jenny. Thank you so
thanks
much.
Everybody. And my thanks to PEN America, to Magic City Books, to Jeff, and just to everybody who's tuned in. I hope you'll buy Good Boy. I hope you'll support these great organizations, and pat a puppy on the head. You'll feel good.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe, and we will see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Good night.